On this edition of Independent Sources, Rezoning Chinatown, city officials and community leaders at odds over the enclave's future. And there's magic in Brooklyn. A new children's book teaches history and racial identity through a mystical journey. Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Garry Pierre Pierre. There's conflict brewing in Chinatown between the Department of City Planning and the Chinatown Working Group. The working group was formed in 2008 and has made a sweeping proposal that would maintain the area's affordability for low-income immigrants while retaining its cultural character. The proposal comes at a time when real estate speculators are driving up property values and rents. Despite these concerns, the DCP says that the planned scope is not feasible right now and has asked for less of a focus on preservation of low-income and affordable housing. Some community leaders are furious because they say that the DCP is asking for major cuts to the proposal, but not making any concessions or laying out a clear strategy of its own. I spoke to City Limits reporter Abigail Savitch-Lew, who's written about the issue. So, Abigail, what is Chinatown zoned for now, and what does the working group wants it to become?
Absolutely. So, right now, Chinatown is zoned for very high-density commercial uses. Back in 1961, when the city put forth the zoning regulations that are still in place now, they imagined that Chinatown would basically become an extension of the downtown Manhattan area, the financial center. And so it's still zoned for that type of very high-scale building, you know, a big hotel, a department, company headquarters. All those types of entities would be allowed right now in Chinatown. And you are seeing a lot of luxury
hotels in the area.
Right,
sure.
Exactly. But it's actually out of character with the older buildings that are still there. That are many of them are renter occupied and are rent stabilized units, although an decreasing amount. And so people in the Chinatown Working Group, the coalition of over 60 organizations that put together this plan, they really want to see the area be zoned so that it more reflects what's going on now.
Which is?
The special zoning district that they want to create would have various subsections. And one of those subsections we're talking about is the heart of Chinatown, the historic district. And in that area, like I said, there's a lot of old buildings. There's a lot of ground floor shops and renter occupied multifamily buildings. And basically the new zoning would say you can't build hotels, you can't build giant commercial use buildings. You can build regional commercial use, so like local, like department stores that are not like, the type of things you'd see in the financial center, and like more neighborhood level stores. And you can, but you can't, and you can build some types of affordable housing and residential development, but really it's lowering the density and it's trying to preserve what's there.
And so what is the city's problem with the working group's proposal?
As I said, the plan is more focused on preservation of affordable housing than on development, although it does...
But that goes against Mayor de Blasio's plan of affordable housing and making the city sort of like the working class, affordable to working class people. And so why is the administration fighting the Chinatown's working group's plan?
Right. So on the surface, it seems it's a little confusing, right? Because the administration has said, we're going to preserve 120,000 units of affordable housing, and we're going to build 80,000. So they also have they also want a mix of preservation and development. But they just think that this plan is like too preservation leaning,
Okay.
although members of the group disagree and say it will allow for affordable housing development.
Who makes up the group, the Chinatown Working Group? Who are they, for the most part?
It's a real diversity of groups, so that includes affordable housing developers and community neighborhood groups and tenant advocates, business owners. So
and the community board too, the local boards are involved?
That's right. Yeah. Community Board 3 is the main one involved, but actually the entire plan includes portions of Community Board 2 and Community Board 1.
Next question. You write in this piece about this issue, you said that Chinatown is uniquely vulnerable to out-of-character development. Why is that?
Yeah.
What makes it so uniquely vulnerable, if you will?
Yes. Well, I would say that the main thing is that it's still zoned for these very high commercial uses, and that encourages landlords and developers to harass tenants who may be non-English speaking, who may be undocumented. And, you know, there's not just Chinese families there. There's Latina families and all sorts of immigrant families in that area. And so both, I think, the residents are vulnerable, and the type of land use in place makes it vulnerable to out-of-character.
So how much does it cost to rent an apartment in Chinatown these days?
Well, this is the thing. So in Chinatown, the median income is about $37,000. So if you were paying what's appropriate for that income, you'd pay a little bit more than $900 a month for
But that's not what people are paying.
No. So market rate rents are ranging anywhere from like the 1,000s to the 9,000s. And then there's also like the fact that although a lot of the units are rent stabilized, a lot of them are rent stabilized, but $2,500 a month. Or
So who's moving into Chinatown? If there's a space for anybody to move, I mean, back in the days, I remember most of it were new immigrants from China and whatnot. So who's moving there now?
Well, I know from speaking to people in the neighborhood that they are feeling displaced by more well-off residents.
Are they Chinese or just
white residents?
White residents, okay.
Yeah, and I think that sense of that the neighborhood is no longer a place for people of color and for immigrants, or will increasingly become unaffordable to those residents, is a really serious issue.
So what's happening with the working group? Are they still meeting, or are they pushing for this proposal, or what's going on?
I would say that the Department of City Planning has told the group that they have a lot of concerns about this plan, right? So right now, a bunch of different groups with a bunch of different organizations that are part of the coalition are speaking kind of one-on-one with the Department of City Planning and trying to push forward whatever they think is right. So, for instance, Community Board 3 is trying to negotiate with Department of City Planning. Maybe
what are they looking for?
Well, they are saying, like, okay, if you don't like our whole plan, let's just focus on the most important parts.
Which
are the core of Chinatown, the NYCHA areas that have NYCHA complexes, and also the Lower East Side waterfront.
So what would they do with those areas? What do they want to do?
So I spoke already about the Chinatown historic area and how they want to really help preserve and they preserve the character of that neighborhood. Their plan for the NYCHA area is very interesting. They want to make sure that there is a more formal process that for any land use changes in that NYCHA area, and that there is more accountability if the city decides that they want to, build a new building there. And they also want to make sure that any new building there is 100% affordable, rather than, like right now, de Blasio has said that in his infill plan, he will have some of those buildings being built on NYCHA property as 50% affordable. Others will be 100% affordable.
And by the way, this is not happening in a vacuum. There's similar plans going on across the city. Can you talk a little bit more about the bigger picture here?
Yes, absolutely. So de Blasio wants to increase affordable housing and also promote neighborhood revitalization. So he's actually undertaking the rezoning of 15 neighborhoods throughout the city. We don't actually know what all those are yet, but
do you have some example of the others?
Yes. So East New York is is already started to undergo the
It's
the
New
voting
York,
process.
and what else?
There's also Harlem.
Okay.
There's Flushing,
Okay.
Bronx. There's a part of Staten Island, the Bay Street Quarter. Those
Okay.
are all down the pipeline.
Okay.
So the city wants those to change. But here's Chinatown. It has its own grassroots developed plan, and they're like, oh, our plan will be, you should adopt our plan too. You should make this part of your strategy. And the Department of City Planning is saying, we're not sure we want to go with that. We'll talk to you about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now going back to the Chinatown Working Group.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what's going to happen there?
Yes. So I hear the Chinatown Working Group is continuing to meet, although a lot of members actually have left because they felt that the forum took up a lot of time and it wasn't always productive, and they are choosing to use their time elsewhere. But yes, they're continuing to push for this plan, and some members of the group are willing to compromise with the Department of City Planning and maybe adopt a portion. Others are holding out. They really want the entire plan adopted.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Abigail Savitch-Lew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gary.
Still to come on the show, a book with a little magic, a little history, and even some social commentary. Before that, Savitch-Lew has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. Voices of New York reports on Arise, a recently launched campaign dedicated to reducing the suicide rate in Guyana and the Caribbean diaspora in the United States. The program was started by the Caribbean Voice, a Bronx-based nonprofit media organization. It's expected to run for 5 years. According to a World Health Organization report released last year, Guyana has the highest suicide rate in the world, averaging 44.2 deaths per 100,000 people. That's twice the global average. The Caribbean Voice hopes to raise awareness and address several of the underlying social and economic issues that have led to these alarming suicide rates through information dissemination, training seminars, rallies, and interventions. El Diario La Prensa recently featured the Nani Migrante Transnational Project. The organization works on reuniting immigrant families living in different countries. The Staten Island-based organization helps the visiting relatives of day laborers and other domestic low-wage workers in the borough to obtain visas. The organization also helps low-income families find sponsors. Once approved, visiting relatives are allowed to stay in New York for a month. 5 families have already been reunited through the program this year. Jews who are involved in interfaith relationships but hope to be admitted into rabbinical school finally have an institution to turn to. The Forward reports that the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College will become the first major rabbinical school in the United States to admit and ordain students who have spouses or partners who are not Jewish. The Reconstructionist Rabbinical College is described as a unique and progressive kind of organization in the contemporary Jewish landscape, where people of all backgrounds engage intensively with Jewish texts, thoughts, and practices. The Haitian people's culture and revolutionary spirit will be on full display during a new program at the Brooklyn Public Library. The program is being run by the Haiti Cultural Exchange, or HCX, a nonprofit aimed at preserving Haitian culture through education, arts, and public affairs. The Haitian Times reports HCX will present a series of public programs around the theme Revolution, or Revolution, to showcase the Haitian people and their continuous quest for liberty and autonomy. Revolution will culminate on Saturday, February 6th and Sunday, February 7th to mark the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Duvalier regime in Haiti. And finally, Billy's back. Legendary jazz singer Billie Holiday, also known as Lady Day, will be returning to Harlem's Apollo Theater in hologram form. The Manhattan Times reports that the theater announced it would be implementing permanent hologram technology featuring the famed singer. Holiday's hologram will be featured during daytime programming, which includes theater tours and educational offerings for school groups and other visitors. Billie is set to debut in November, making the Apollo Theater the first theater in the country to offer hologram presentations on an ongoing basis. Those were just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be right back.
Thanks for staying tuned. This week's On the Shelf segment features the children's book Dayshaun's Gift. The book is written by Canadian author Zetta Elliot, who has made it her mission to introduce children of color to more characters of color. This latest book takes the main character Dayshaun on a mystical journey through time, where he meets some historical legends and learns some valuable lessons. Savitch-Lew sat down with Elliot to learn more about the book and her mission.
Zetta, thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about Dayshaun's Gift. Let's give the audience a sense of what the book's all about.
Sure. Dayshaun's Gift is book 2 in my City Kids series. And I decided that because I grew up reading fantasy fiction, I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Canada reading mostly British literature. So that was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
Right.
and E. Nesbit, The Phoenix and the Carpet was one of my favorite books. But those books don't contain children of color,
Right.
or if they do, they're represented in really distorted caricature ways. So I decided that I wanted to write some fantastic stories that combine 2 of my favorite things, and that's magic and history.
Right.
And because I'm an immigrant, even though I've been here for 20 years, I walk around Brooklyn with my eyes wide open, and everything is new and fantastic to me. And I have a tendency to look for things that seem older than the things around them. So when I pass a church, I generally check the cornerstone to see what date it was built. And I just think Brooklyn's amazing. But I have worked with kids for 25 years, and the students I was working with in 1998 in Bed-Stuy were not so impressed with their own neighborhood. And I thought, what if I could find a way to teach them about their local history where they felt really engaged and excited, and I found that the only way to do that was to have a contemporary element. And so time travel became the obvious solution. And I read Octavia Butler's Kindred. Have you read that?
No, I haven't.
Oh my goodness. So Octavia Butler is the foremost, probably, African-American science fiction writer. And when she was with us, she produced some incredible stories. And Kindred actually stands out from the rest of hers because it's historical fiction. And she has a contemporary woman who gets sucked back in time again and again and again
Right.
to antebellum Maryland to save the life of her ancestor. And she has to save his life because he has to rape her great-great-great-grandmother in order to start the family line.
Right,
so
right.
not appropriate for young children.
But yeah.
And I was writing my dissertation in graduate school at the time on representations of rape and lynching, also not appropriate for children. But I really wanted to find a way to talk about the reality of history in a way that was compelling and exciting and empowering. I think that's when I encounter resistance from kids when you say, we're going to talk about history, and they kind of groan and go, oh, here we go again. It's because of the way history is taught, and a lot of African-American children specifically think the only thing that matters about our history is slavery. And kids don't want to study about the degradation and humiliation of enslavement. So for me, I thought, all right, here I am in Brooklyn. Brooklyn has this amazing, rich history. Slavery ended in 1827 in New York State. So up until between 1827 and the start of the Civil War, what was happening in those decades? And I have written a young adult novel, a time travel novel called A Wish After Midnight,
Right.
and that sends a 15-year-old girl and her Jamaican immigrant boyfriend back in time to 1863 Brooklyn. Brooklyn's its own city.
Right.
She's
Before the
believed-
bridge.
Before the bridge, exactly.
Right.
So it's very much sort of insular, still connected by ferry. But a lot's going on in 1863. Of course, we have the Emancipation Proclamation that takes effect on January 1st. So fugitive slaves in states that have seceded from the Union are declared free. And when Jenna is found, her back is covered in blood, and they assume she's a fugitive slave that's run from the South. So to get back to Dayshaun's
Right,
gift,
I was about to say it.
your question. So I've already done a lot of writing about this subject, and I've written about, racial violence for scholars in my dissertation, and I've written about it for teenagers and young adults in my novel. But I really was grappling with this idea of how do we talk about kind of grim racial tensions with young children. And last summer, I was trying to finish the novel, and I just couldn't. I'm writing another novel right now, the sequel to A Wish After Midnight, and I ended up writing a picture book story called The Last Bunny in Brooklyn. And with Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and so many, Rekia Boyd, so many of the killings of young black people that we see over and over and over again with no justice, I just thought, how do parents talk to their children about this, right? Do you really try to avoid the subject? And I can understand how a parent might want a book, especially a fantasy novel, to take their child away from that reality. But I tend to feel that historical fantasy in particular is a genre that helps kids to engage more deeply with history, and it helps them to explore issues of justice. So in Dayshaun's Gift, you have a little boy. He's about 8 or 9 years old, and his parents have recently gotten divorced. He's getting used to the fact that he spends one weekend with his dad, one weekend with his mom. When he's with his dad, he gets to play video games and hang out and go shopping. Dad's the fun parent, and Mom says, you have to come with me to the Weeksville Heritage Center because we're going to garden in the community garden. Right. And Dayshaun kind of rolls his eyes like, I can't believe I have to spend Saturday gardening. And there's a bunch of elderly people in the garden, and it's a really hot summer's day, and his mom says, well, you know, gardening runs in our family, and here's your grandfather's hat. It'll keep the sun off your head. Right. Dayshaun starts gardening. He gets super hot. He doesn't want to wear his grandfather's grubby hat, but as soon as he puts it on, the world starts spinning, and he ends up being sent back in time to Weeksville, 1863.
Wow.
And he meets two young people. Teddy Gaines, who's a young boy playing marbles, and then a young woman who's a bit older, about 15 years old, Susan Smith. Susan Smith was the daughter of Sylvanus Smith, who was one of the first landowners in what became the village of Weeksville. Okay. So it's named for James Weeks, and he started purchasing his land in 1838, but Sylvanus actually had land before that.
And Weeksville was the home of so many freed blacks.
This is the sanctuary, right, which is in contemporary Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, that area.
Right.
And so Dayshaun meets Susan Smith, and she says, well, why don't you come with us? He's like, I'm just visiting. He doesn't really know what's happening to him. But the two kids say, come with us. We're going to go into the woods and help the refugees. And, of course, he's like, refugees? We don't have refugees in the United States. And so they begin explaining to him what happened with the draft riots. And there's distance from the actual riots themselves, which are pretty scary. But what Dayshaun's able to do with the help of Susan and Teddy is to help the refugees who were camping out in the woods, right, and to find out what they went through. And Susan, you know, is talking about how this is a chance for her to practice medicine. And Teddy's teasing her, saying, a girl can never become a doctor. And Susan says, oh, I'm going to be a doctor one day. And Dayshaun says, well, girls can do anything where I'm from.
Right.
And Susan Smith goes on to become the first African-American woman doctor in New York State.
Wow.
So she's an important figure. She did a lot of things for Weeksville. She wanted to start a home for the aged. There's a school named after her in Fort Greene. Mm-hmm. But she's someone that young kids should really know about. And I wanted to introduce her in Dayshaun's gift so that there was an actual historical figure alongside the kind of fantastic elements.
That's awesome. And, you know, there's a lot of themes that you deal with in the book. And one of them that I kind of want to go back to something you mentioned earlier where you said, in the book, Dayshaun says, nothing magical ever happens here in Weeksville. And I thought that stood out to me in the book. I think it spoke to that kind of idea of things just being mundane.
Yeah. And
I wanted to find out, you know, why did you... It's obviously, it was ironic what you're doing. It's a setup. Yeah, but I kind of want you to speak just a little bit about that, the importance of young people in particular, recognizing the significance of history around them.
Yeah, well, one of the effects of having children only read books about white children. So Rudine Sims Bishop says books should be a mirror, a window, and a sliding glass door. And as a child, I read books that were windows. I was looking into someone else's world. And I think a lot of kids today, maybe they're not kids anymore, but they grew up reading Harry Potter. And to them, magic means 3 white kids living in a castle in England. And it was really important to me that kids know that magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. Yeah. Right? Anyone, anywhere. You don't have to go looking for magic somewhere else. And a lot of time travel stories take kids out of the city. Why do they have to leave the city? The city can be a source of magic. So when Dayshaun says nothing magical ever happens at Weeksville, well, there are so many stories waiting to be told. And you know, there are 3 historic houses still standing on the site that originally was Weeksville. And you can go to the center and take a tour of those houses. And I just feel like so many of the kids that I teach, and even people in the neighborhood, you know, we walk by Weeksville, we walk around it, we walk past it, and we no longer engage with that history. And I think adding the possibility of magic means that it opens up the world of possibilities to children, and it means that they can go back and think of themselves as empowered, because that's what magic is. It's a narrative about power and who gets to use it and who gets to share it. And then if you're using power, if you're negotiating for it and distributing it, how can you do it in a way that's just? And I think when you live in a community that has been marginalized and oppressed, it's very easy to become bitter and to feel disempowered, and that's the last thing you want for a child. So on the one hand, I have this impulse towards realistic fiction, and I'm not going to shy away from the things that happened. You know, I really would like us to have a conversation about terrorism, because for a lot of kids, you know, terrorism is something that started on 9/11, and it's something that's perpetrated by people who are brown against people who are not brown. Right. And I would like children to understand that in the United States, terrorism has a very long history that goes well beyond 9/11. And even today, you know, the biggest problem we have right now is with domestic terrorism. So when are we really going to start talking about it?
Absolutely. Well, Zetta, a real pleasure. I wish we had more time to talk, but this has been great.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
Absolutely.
Dayshaun's gift is available online at Amazon.com, Teaching for Change, and on the author's website, ZettaElliot.com. We'll be right back. That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.